to introduce Dr. Anton Babushkin. Dr. Anton Babushkin is a psychoanalyst with over 15 years experience. He is the founder and CEO of Start My Wellness, website on the slide. He is a Michigan Psychoanalytic Institute member and a contributing professor at Wayne State School of Social Work. He does ongoing presentations and consultation with local businesses and organizations on corporate wellness, and has done previous presentations on wellness and coronavirus that are affecting us and important to today's presentation. And he takes an individual approach to his patients and really building inner strength and resourcefulness for his clients. So without further ado, Dr. Babushkin, I will turn over this presentation to you.
Thank you, Janelle, and thank you for the very nice, kind introduction. Hello to everybody. Okay, I'm the presenter. I will share my screen in just a second, but I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this group tonight. I think, you know, I wanted to frame the conversation tonight as a dialogue because we all have something to contribute in the area of wellness. You know, I'm going to offer a particular point of view that I think may be of use to our group, and hopefully we can talk about it together. But really, wellness is a group activity. You know, it's hard to be well or sort of like take care of yourself on your own. It's a community action. It takes friends, coworkers, colleagues. You know, the more that it's kind of like we have to co-create a culture of wellness, because it's very hard to be just taking care of yourself on your own in isolation. It's not impossible, but it's harder. And so a lot of my presentations today is going to be about how to partner with other people, how to work together to accomplish a culture of wellness. So, and then one thing that I'd like to say is I have a few slides that were, as Janan pointed out, I built some of my comments based on the survey. So yes, so thank you to people who answered the survey. There was a lot of very kind of honest, I think, answers about how people are doing and the struggles they're facing. I think it's a difficult time for anybody, obviously. And some people maybe are adjusting more easily than others, but I think it's a strain, because it's not like life was easy before March of this year, but this is an additional thing we're all working on. And I think with some degree of success, I mean, just our meeting tonight and kind of collaborating, to me, suggests that people are sort of trying to rise to the occasion and say, okay, you know, we're facing some challenges, but we're going to try to make do with what we have and use our resources to make the best of the situation. So what I'd like to do is, when I go through the slides, please feel free to drop comments in the chat or the Q&A. I believe you have access to that through the WebEx, because I mostly want this to be a conversation, in the sense of, like, I could just kind of talk at the group, you know, for 30 minutes or whatever, but I think it'd be much more useful to hear from you in terms of things you're doing, facing situations you're in, because I'm going to talk about a particular methodology that I find is useful in my work, but I want us to see if we can apply it and sort of see where it works or where it needs to be modified or how it can be applicable to your life. Okay, so that's just a brief intro. Let me share my screen here. Okay, I believe you can see my screen now. Okay, so basically, as Janine pointed out, yes, I run this organization called startmywellness.com. Basically, we're a corporate wellness company. We focus on helping companies or organizations develop and follow through on wellness. That could be emotional wellness, physical wellness. Our goal is to help groups of people get organized and kind of do right by themselves and by others, and create an environment where wellness and taking care of oneself is like a core value and something that we not only talk about, but act on. So that's the company that I run. And today what we're going to talk about is sort of a methodology that includes 4 steps. You can see here on the slide, the design your own future is kind of like the outcome, but the 4 steps are: start with you, focus on affordable losses, be flexible, and ask for help. And I'm going to go into what all these mean, but basically this is a methodology that I think can be useful. One of the hard things that I think about this pandemic is it's required all of us to kind of stop and think about, okay, how's my life going? What am I doing? How am I adapting? A person in the comments today made a point about, this is giving me a chance to sort of refocus on myself and my personal growth. I think that's a really nice point, because on the one hand, this is a stressful situation. On the other hand, it sort of requires a rethinking of our lives. You know, a lot of companies today are saying, okay, should we start working from home more? Or how do we manage our employees? How do we interact with each other? What's our communication style? So it's both forced us to kind of solve this problem for the short term, but it's also, I think, the companies that are the most progressive are asking the questions for the long term. Okay, what can we learn from, you know, before we used to think, okay, maybe nobody can work from home and run a successful organization, but we've been forced to basically operate out of some kind of living quarters where you might just have like a basic computer, not your usual desk setup, but people have been able to work successfully. That says that there's a lot more resilience and kind of good culture established than we know of, or that we were aware of, and we're making use of that infrastructure. Okay, so my presentation is really let me walk through these steps. The first one I think is fairly straightforward. Start with you, meaning the way to focus and deal with self-care is to try to do a self-assessment. You have to, I think one of the things that's hard about self-care is it's often talked about as like a behavior. You know, I'm going to spend 5 minutes, you know, meditating today, or I'm going to drink tea every morning or whatever. And those are really nice activities that I think everybody can do, and you know, they're really nice. But the goal of self-care really is to develop a mindset, a lifestyle. You know, you really don't want it to be a one-off. Like the reason I have this little picture of a garden is because self-care and taking good care of yourself is like something that we want to cultivate. Now, that may be intimidating or might seem like a lot, but really it's composed of small steps. You know, you can see here in the picture, the person is sort of pouring water on the plant just out of their hand. In other words, I think the picture sort of signifies very, very small steps that over time can accumulate to a lot. Now, it takes a lot for a plant to grow. It has to be the right soil, it has to be the right environment, the right nutrients, right, the right seeds. So it's not that it's so simple, but the goal of starting with you is to try to do a self-assessment. It's kind of like if I was a plant, I'd be saying to myself, okay, what's my environment? What's the soil like? What nutrients do I need? I want to check in with myself about where am I? What's working, what isn't? And start from there. And what resources do I have at my disposal? That could be resources like my education, my knowledge, my colleagues, you know, things like that. So I start with you. Affordable losses. Now, I think this is it's kind of just a fancy way of saying you want to try small things and see what works. Like, you know, probably most of you have heard, sometimes there'll be like a book about, oh, how to save for retirement. Well, step one, don't buy coffee every morning. Set that money aside in your piggy bank. And I think that's kind of funny in the sense that, like, you know, $1 or $2 coffee is probably not going to help you save for retirement. But realistically, the idea makes sense because it's those small everyday changes that if you adjust them correctly, or if you're mindful of them, you can start to notice like what kind of effect are my actions having on my life, and how can I change those small actions, not just with not buying coffee, but you know, many different things to create a good outcome. You know, like people talk about Warren Buffett, for example, as a successful investor. Well, one of Warren Buffett's strategies is to invest in the long term and to have things build on, you know, his autobiography was called The Snowball Effect, I think, because it's a question of doing small things, seeing which ones work, and then letting them build on each other. So a culture of wellness or self-care has to start small and can become something that's really tremendous, but it can only happen that way through gradual incremental steps. Okay, the next part here is being flexible. And being flexible, I mean, the goal is I want to live a better life. I want to take good care of myself. I want to have more time for my family. But how I get there and what that looks like is going to be flexible, because we don't know ahead of time of, okay, what steps are going to work or what's that future going to look like. It's important to have some goals in mind, but the way we go after them and pursue them, it requires flexibility, because there's no, you know, I couldn't tell you now, let's say there's 100 people on this call. Every one of you is going to have slightly a different approach to how you're going to try to improve your life. You're going to face different challenges. You're going to have different resources. You're going to have different strengths and different vulnerabilities. But my goal here is basically to say that it's possible. There are many changes that are possible if you step aside and sort of think about your life strategically. The last point here in the intro is the asking for help. And by that, I mean, it could be collaborating with your friends, your coworkers, it's very important to try to think about partnerships. A lot of things that have to do with wellness are very hard to do on your own. For example, let's say childcare. Right now, with school being back in session, many parents, I think, are really struggling with, okay, how are we going to manage homeschooling our kids, or virtual school, or taking our kids to school part-time, things like that. Very stressful. But through partnerships or with their friends or other parents, it probably makes it more manageable. Maybe not easy, not simple. And I don't mean these people are so easy to find. If I say, okay, I want to have 3 parents I'm going to, share childcare responsibilities with, it's not like those people are just findable, in a phone book. But the goal is that partnerships help make new things possible. Like working with our collaborating together on this panel, we're going to have more ideas and better collaboration than I would on my own, or maybe the other panelists on their own. We're going to kind of share knowledge with each other and come up with better solutions, because you could see what I'm maybe not able to pay attention to or to notice. So partnerships really matter, and asking for help is a good way to establish those lines of communication. Those 4 steps are designed to, the goal is to design your future. A lot of people who answered the survey, they put very realistic things on there. I'm struggling with work stress or financial stress or family things. I mean, some people, of course, put things like, I'm managing okay, or I'm doing, I'm kind of coming through okay, which is really great. I want to celebrate that too. It's not that we're not here to only talk about suffering or, really bad situations, but sure, many people, I think, are realistically under a lot of pressure to try to figure something out. But the goal for me, what I want to say is that the best way to practice self-care is to try to think about, what's my life strategy? How am I going about my life now? What's working for me now? What isn't? And how can I begin to redesign that strategy? Now, that might be hard to do on your own. I don't mean you have to kind of take out a pen and paper and say, okay, well, because that may not be your strength in terms of redesigning that strategy. So again, that's where the issue of collaboration comes in. But the overall idea is to try to have a picture in mind of, what kind of life do I want to be living? What's the lifestyle I'm trying to achieve? And how can I gradually start to take steps? You want to have a long-term view. So I'm going to go over some specific things that people mentioned in the questionnaire, but and I can't see the Q&A because I'm sharing my screen. So Jan, if you notice, if people are making along the way, whether right now, if people have any questions about any of my introductory comments, anything I've said, please let me know.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I so far I haven't seen anything. Oh, well.
There's one question. Yes.
Yeah, there's one question.
If someone's never done one, where would someone find a structure of how to do a self-assessment?
Oh, a very good question. Okay, so self-assessment basically means, try to just think about it this way. You don't need a question. You don't need like a, a lot of times companies these days focus on these kind of like created assessments, like the DISC assessment, things like that, something very structured, but you really don't need anything like that. What I would encourage you to do is take out a piece of paper on your computer and think about several important areas of your life. For most of us, that probably would include our health, like how am I doing, how am I doing physically? Am I in okay health? Am I taking care of myself? Am I eating the right foods? Part 1. Part 2, most of us care about relationships or people in our lives. That could be family, coworkers, anybody else. Most people need to work to earn a living, so finances, is another area. Entertainment, fun, things that we do for joy or pleasure, and also like aspirations, things that maybe we want to achieve or we hope for. I would just say take those 5 areas. You could add or subtract. That's like, let's say that's just my list right now, but take those 5, add or subtract, and then say, okay, just let me list those categories and say, okay, starting with me, how am I doing? What's my day-to-day life like? On a given week, how do I feel like, am I feeling okay? Am I feeling burned out? And you want to get specific, because it's easy to say, for example, oh, it's Friday and I'm really tired and it's been a long week. But the most important question is, why am I tired? Am I tired because the week was very productive, but I had a lot to do? Am I tired because I'm overwhelmed at work and I need more help? Am I tired because my kids need a lot of help and I don't know how to manage this homeschooling? It could be all the above. The most important question is to try to be specific about what's going on in my life now, pros and cons. It doesn't have to be an exhaustive list, just kind of get started. Part of the reason my company is called Start My Wellness is because I think getting started can be intimidating. But try not to, it's kind of like, a lot of times gyms will try to sell you on fancy equipment. They'll say, oh, if you buy the Peloton, you're going to be in shape. Just spend like $5,000, and like, or whatever. I don't mean to put down Peloton, it's a nice company, but the idea is if you buy the equipment, then you'll be fit. But realistically, all you really need to be fit is just your body, your own body weight. If you do like sit-ups or push-ups, whatever, jumping jacks, you really only need your body to stay fit. Now, people may not always know how to do it or whatever, but you don't need any fancy survey to do a self-assessment. Just try to think about what matters to me. What do I care about? What do I like? What do I love? What am I struggling with? Write those things down to begin thinking about your life. The important thing here is to do a check-in of like, to spend that time. Like I was talking to a friend recently who has 2 young kids, they're doing homeschooling. And I was talking through this presentation with him a little bit and saying like, hey, Dave, does this make sense? He said, it does. One of the hardest things for my wife and I was to acknowledge, hey, we actually have to make a change. Like we didn't want to accept that things are kind of tough right now. We were hoping things would kind of just resolve themselves. We've come to the conclusion that it isn't, at least for the time being. And so I think this self-assessment is the same thing. It's kind of like saying, I'm actually going to take a few seconds or a few minutes to say, hey, how is my life going in the things that matter to me? So I hope that, and again, this is an ongoing conversation, but I think that's the goal here is not to make it overly complex, but just kind of do a pen and paper or, on your computer, like a quick analysis of your life. And then you could start from there and kind of dive further into it. It's like when you go to ancestry.com, you start with just your own family, then you add this, you add that, you could always add to that assessment, but I think that's a reasonable starting point. So I hope that answers the question. And again, I really appreciate that comment because that's the kind of conversation I think we could, that's the most fruitful way for us to interact is because I want this to really be applicable for your life and make sense to you. My goal is for you to walk away with something you can tangibly do in your own home or at work or wherever you are today. You know what I mean? Try to not look for the perfect solution or, the right assessment. Just try to do something DIY because that's a good enough starting point. That can inform you on next steps you can take. So hopefully that answers, at least begins to answer the question. So the 4 things that kind of came out of the survey to me were, and I'll just run through these slides and then I'll come back to them. The first one was, how do I balance work and family? I think it's important for almost any adult in America right now. The second was financial and job stress. Again, also something I think a lot of us are facing. Also, another one was staying organized and kind of managing the workday, as well as making sure we don't forget our long-term goals. And the last one I put here is time for having fun, meaning like, how do I make time? If I'm a busy parent or I'm a busy employee or whatever I'm doing, how do I make time for also enjoyment? Because that's just a natural thing people want. We all want some type of enjoyment in our lives. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the start here and basically say, first of all, there's no simple answer to how to balance work and family. And the reason I want to say that is because it's a hard thing to do. And my goal here is not to say, hey, just go home and make sure you set an alarm clock at 4:55 p.m. And when that alarm clock goes off, you turn off your computer and you focus on your family. And then at 8 p.m., you put your kids to bed and then you focus on yourself. You know what I mean? I guess that's like a reasonable timeline, but it all depends on your situation and where you are. So that it's much easier to say than to do. So my preference would be to say, okay, if I'm talking about balancing work and family, let me follow this checklist. Start with me, for example. Where do I work? What are my strengths and what are my resources? Do I have any flexibility in my workday? Do I have any childcare resource? Some companies right now are really focused on trying to help employees be flexible and say, okay, we all know that for people who have kids, childcare is really stressful at the moment. What can we do? Now, that doesn't mean your employer always has money or resources to kind of throw at the problem, but employers, I think, are understanding, and even in my own company, we have about almost 20 people in my group. We're not a company with a ton of money to throw at the problem, but we're saying, okay, if somebody has kids, let's plan together. What's that going to look like? What can we help with? What other resources does the parent have access to? The goal is to start with yourself and say, okay, what problems am I facing? What resources do I have, and what can I do? You know what I mean? Like my sister. She has 2 kids. She's in a fortunate position where she and some other parents got together and they found a person who was like a retired teacher who's going to help the kids during the school day, like do their virtual school. So the teacher's going to be there kind of making sure the kids are staying on track. Okay, I know that's not always findable or not everybody has access to that, but the idea is basically like, okay, how can we kind of pool our knowledge base together and do something that will help the entire group and make my day manageable. The second step here, again, is affordable losses. Now, that's just like a fancy way of saying, try to not think about what's my overall solution or what's the perfect solution or what's exactly going to get me to the finish line. Try to think about, do I have any options at all? Now that I've checked in with myself with what's troubling me or what am I stressed out about, do I have any room for growth? Is there any option to kind of shift or try anything? And that trial should be hopefully small enough to where even if it goes wrong, you're not going to get so discouraged. You know what I mean? I wouldn't say, okay, most of us can't afford to quit our jobs and say, I'm just going to focus on, helping my kid get through school. I think that would be maybe great if it was an option, but we usually can't do that. So that might mean, shifting my work schedule to try to make it more manageable. But it's about trying different strategies and see which one might be workable. Again, being flexible. That I think in this context means not having one. The goal here should be, I need to be able to go to my work and I need to be able to be present with my family for some part of the day. And I also ideally need to try to set up my life so I have some time for some downtime, because nobody can work all day or all the time. Now, again, do I mean that that's always easy to arrange? It's not. My goal is to say, try not to think about your life as it is what it is and there's no options. I think it's more effective to think about, okay, this is the way my life is set up right now. These are the commitments I've made as of today. This is how it's working. And use your own feel. Our feelings are like a source of information. If I'm feeling stressed out every day and overwhelmed and everything is kind of unmanageable, that likely means something in the system of my life isn't working. Now, I may not know exactly what to do or what the solution is, but I should at least pay attention to that feeling and say, okay, something about my day feels really off because I'm always like running around. Now, that could be either I have a hard time managing stress, or maybe I need help, or I need to recruit some assistance, but pay attention to like those feelings, because that's going to give you some source of information. Okay, what's going on here? And then you can start to think, what can I do about it? Asking for help. Again, I don't mean that it's so easy to go, asking for help is not like going to the grocery store and saying, okay, here's some ramen noodles I can pick up off the shelf and that's going to perfectly solve my situation. But it does mean looking in your life and your network and saying, okay, what problem am I facing and how can I solve it? Because it's kind of like using Zoom, right? I think a year ago, probably most people would say, Zoom, what are you talking about? I mean, some of us maybe have used it for work, but it wasn't something that we were used to doing. Now, people do, they hang out with their friends, they do work stuff. It's kind of like a part of everyday life. But we all had to kind of find, like this WebEx, thing that we're doing right now. We had to find a way to kind of custom fit some kind of solution. But that only came out of reflecting on what's working, what isn't, and how can I solve this particular issue. The key point here is to make sure to check in with yourself and think about, okay, how is my day going and what is giving me stress and how can I consider some options about it? So this is part one. Now, again, if people have questions, what I'm hoping that we might do is somebody might say, hey, this sounds all well and good, but this is a situation I'm facing. I'm not sure that's really going to work for me. If you have those kind of questions, please feel free to raise them, because we want to have a conversation about it. Now, you might say, oh, yeah, I've tried that and it really worked for me as well. I mean, I welcome those comments too, but the goal here is to try to think together about, you always want to be able to step back and sort of problem solve the situation in a creative kind of way. So I hope that message comes across. Okay, now the second topic here is financial and job stress. Again, I saw in a lot of comments that people wrote in the survey that it's very, people are struggling because work is stressful. People are working from home, and so it's a different setup. There's not the same kind of rules. When you go into the workplace and you have sort of a structure, you come in at a certain time, you leave at a certain time, there's kind of like lunch breaks. It helps you to manage your day because you have set expectations. Now, working from home, a lot of that we have to do for ourselves. We have to set up our own schedule. We have to manage our own time. If there's kind of like family in the background, we have to manage, making room for getting things done. So a lot of it is sort of, we've ended up in a situation where things that we kind of did almost like routine. Have you ever driven a car somewhere and you kind of get there and you say, wow, I don't even remember driving here, because you're so used to going to that destination, you do it on autopilot. I think for a lot of us before the pandemic, we were used to our sort of day-to-day life to a degree. So we kind of did it on autopilot. Not that we weren't present, but we were sort of like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I know what to do, so to speak. In the current situation, I think a lot of people have had to step back and say, whoa, wait a second. I'm all of a sudden, I'm more stressed. I see my coworkers less. I have less time for breaks. My kids need a ton of help. And, I'm a single parent. I'm worried about losing my job, or my spouse lost their job. What's going on with the economy? I don't have my usual activities. I like to go bowling. The bowling alley's closed. Whatever activities a person might do. And it's easy to feel overwhelmed and anxious about all those changes. But the goal, again, of this methodology here is to say that, yeah, it might feel unmanageable because you're not used to it or because it's a new situation. But realistically, I think most of the people who, most of us have a lot of creative problem-solving skills that we don't put to use because we either are used to doing things the way we do them, or we don't take time to step back and think about our lives. And so the goal of these kind of simple 4 steps is just to say, okay, wait a second. Let me try to assess my situation. Okay, what are my financial stressors? What are my resources? What can I turn to? Let me try to do a check-in about how am I doing with my finances. Let me try to think about affordable losses, meaning what kind of small steps can I take? Now, losses, I think this is an okay wording, but in this situation, it's a little bit of a misnomer. In a sense of, we want to try to do, okay, can I cut my budget to some degree? Or can I kind of make some adjustments? The reason I put here at the bottom, key point, think like an accountant, is because one of the things I've learned as a business owner is that every dollar counts. Before I was running a business, okay, maybe I'd go to the grocery store, I'd spend an extra dollar here, extra dollar there. I sort of wouldn't maybe think a lot about, a pack of gum that I was buying, for example. But as a business owner, one of the things you quickly realize is that every single dollar adds up, because you might spend a dollar here and a dollar there. At the end of the year, that could be thousands of dollars because the business has so many, moving parts. But I think it's a really great mindset to apply to our lives now, is to think, okay, not that we should be worried about every single penny we spend, but to try to think wisely about what's my money committed to? I want the money that I have access to be committed to the right things. What are things do I most value? And what do I need to do now during this time to take care of myself and set up an environment where I can hopefully manage? Now, hopefully it's a temporary situation. Maybe we'll have a vaccine, maybe by sometime next year, the economy will begin to recover. But so it's kind of like a short-term and a longer-term solution. But the goal for me is to say, you want to check in with yourself and think about, okay, if I'm feeling really financially stressed out, what are my options? How can I be flexible, and who can I recruit to help? That may mean that I'm carpooling, with somebody, or sort of pooling my resources with other people to try to make things affordable. Again, to go back to the example of my sister with a teacher, she and some friends are pulling together some resources to pay this woman who is going to be helping their kids through virtual school. Again, not that may not be on everybody's radar. Not everybody has kids, but the idea is, don't try to do it all by yourself. Don't try to sort of say, I need to, reinvent the wheel. There are many, you're much better off trying to think about, okay, what's at my disposal and who can I partner with and collaborate to try to make good things possible. And this kind of also goes into my next slide, which has to do with staying organized and long-term goals. A lot of people, again, in the survey put things like, it's very hard for me to manage my day now, or I have a lot of aspirations for my career. Like maybe I want to go to graduate school and get additional training and kind of advance my career. I don't know how I'm going to do that. And I think, again, it's really hard to, when you think about something like, how do I stay organized and how do I manage my day? Okay, there's no kind of one solution, because the goal is to try to think about the moving parts. Okay, what part of my day am I having a hard time staying organized? Like a lot of people put, for example, the workday feels like it never ends. But the question I would ask is, well, why is that? Am I having a hard time stopping at a certain point? Do I have more work to do? Am I not managing my time? Am I not looking at the clock? Do I need a reminder from my supervisor about like, hey, you're all set for today, you can be done? You know what I mean? What specifically am I having a hard time being organized around? Because there's not one, or you could read a million books about organization and they're going to say, oh, do this trick, or I've done that, or Coach Bob told me to do this. But all those things may be really fancy ideas, but they may not apply to your specific situation. The most important thing you could do in any one of these areas, whether it's family, whether it's financial stuff, whether it's staying organized, is to try to think about what specifically in my day is going wrong or not working, and how can I try to shift that thing. Now, like, you know, if it means trying to make sure I stay on a clock, okay, well, how am I going to do that? What am I good at? Am I good at setting an alarm? Or am I good at, you know, kind of can I talk to a colleague and say, hey, can we check in at lunch every day so I have a kind of a better management of my time? You know, I want to try to think about what works for me. Am I good with technology so I can have a technological solution? Am I good with people so I can kind of partner with some colleagues and kind of keep each other on track? Am I good with, you know, does my family help me to do this? So I can talk to my family and say, hey, when it's 5 o'clock, knock on my door and say, hey, aren't you, you know, what's going on? Are you going to make time for us? In other words, try to think about what are you good at and what can you do to try to organize your life? Because there's no exact playbook. It has to do with assessing the situation and trying to use your own skill set to try to problem solve. Or if you don't know what that skill set is, I would talk to other people who are in your life and say, hey, how are you managing your day now? What is it that you're doing to kind of, you know, go to work every day and still be able to manage during this pandemic? And then whatever they say, you can sort of take away the things that you value and throw away the things that you don't. I was doing a presentation recently about something self-care related. And one of the things I mentioned was, you know, it's like having a guidebook. No guidebook is going to have all the points that you want. You want to take, let's say, the top 3 guidebooks, rip out the sections that matter to you, and put together your own sort of Frankenstein guidebook that has the core good things from each one. And your life is specific to you. And just like these kind of tasks, they should be applying to what may help you get through the day and kind of take care of the things that you need to take care of. And again, I think that if people have a particular situation or something that you're thinking about as I'm talking, please feel free to add it in the chat, because I think you'll gain, this presentation will have more value for you. We could walk through it together. In other words, you can even do it anonymously. You know, we don't have to announce who the person is if you don't want to. But I think by applying these steps together, you'll begin to see how this methodology could really work for anybody, because it's a very kind of straightforward ideas of ways that you can kind of problem solve your day.
So Dr. Babushkin, we do have a question. So a question from Diana Smits, and it's a lot of stories I'm hearing from other working moms is that they're experiencing limited, if no flexibility from employers while working from home with children. What are your thoughts on this factor in decision-making around managing this area of stress?
Okay, it's a nice question. So here's one idea I have. Okay, let's say I'm working somewhere and I know my employer is not giving people flexibility. And I think it's being a single parent is especially hard because, like, I have a dog, for example, and taking care of a dog is sort of enough stress. I can't imagine being a single parent. That's a lot of responsibility. But what I think a person could do is to say, okay, if my employer is not somehow giving that kind of flexibility, but I know there are other female workers in this company, can I talk with them and sort of say, hey, are you facing this issue in the workplace where, you know, you need some flexibility and you don't have it? And they might say, yeah, I actually am. Okay, can I talk to a few of those people and then kind of get a pool of opinion and then approach the employer and say, you know, Miss Employer, there's a group of us that's facing this issue. And we're not asking for a free lunch or, you know, just kind of like time off that maybe the company can't afford. But there are like at least 10 of us here that have this issue. Is it possible to give us some flexibility or work on a strategy that make, I'm pretty sure an employer is not going to say no to a group of people who are all valuable contributors to the workplace, but are all struggling with the same issue. So that goes to the asking for help feature, because you want to try to think about your resources. As a single person, it may be hard to kind of have a voice or advocate for. You can advocate for yourself, but that's easily ignored. But I would say, okay, if I'm facing this issue, it's very likely that there are other. Now, a person could say, maybe there's only men here in the workplace and I'm the only female. Well, I'm sure those men, for example, may have a spouse at home who's also facing, like, you know what I mean? You could do a survey of your sort of colleagues and say, okay, I think like a bunch of us are in the same situation. I have a little document that we put together that says, hey, we're actually dealing with this stuff, and can we and the employer work together to come up with some kind of strategy? I think that may be a very effective approach because you have the evidence. You're not just kind of coming out and saying, hey, Mr. or Miss Employer, I'm struggling. You're saying, hey, I've taken the time to kind of assess the situation, see that I'm not the only one facing this problem. I've even maybe problem solved some potential solutions. And now I'm coming to you to have a conversation about it. I'm saying, hey, can we put our minds together and think of what might be doable so that I can take care of my kids and still do my main goal is to do really well while I'm at work. But the best way I'll be able to do that is when I know my kid is in a good place, with a caregiver or, somebody there. I think that message would resonate very strongly with most employers because they're not going to be able to say no to that kind of evidence. But it's collecting that evidence and kind of thinking that and using your resources that I think will give you a leg up. Otherwise, you would look sort of unprepared and kind of like, oh, the employer can say, okay, I'll come back to it. But I think the way that we're talking about it now would be harder for them to ignore. They're more likely to respond. I think I appreciate the question. Any other comments? And I know we're going to have really my sort of formal presentation. With a few more minutes, we're going to have a formal Q&A, but feel free to kind of jump in with any other observations.
We have one other comment, and that comment is, I agree, being on autopilot pre-pandemic. Now I feel like I have a checklist that I have to complete daily because now I have more time and I am more aware that I need to be focusing on all areas of my life versus being on autopilot before.
Okay, that's a great point. And I think one of the things that that may help you is to try to say, okay, can I take this methodology moving forward? You know what I mean? This sort of like moment in time that we're in now, like one of the people mentioned in the chat at the very beginning, one of the things you want to do is to try to take advantage of this moment and say, what kind of strategies can I learn now about managing my time, taking care of myself, that I can really continue to implement? Because I think the hope would be that once we're back to normal, whatever that looks like, I could still take that checklist and say, okay, I thought that really worked for me. It really helped to have some items off the day. So I made sure to spend some time with my family. I made sure to take a walk outside, whatever. You know what I mean? I made sure to do those activities. And that really helped me to kind of be present and aware. And I would hope that you could take that methodology forward and continue to apply it to your life, because I'm guessing you yourself can see the benefit of it. You know what I mean? You're doing it because it's working for you. You can see that it's a productive thing. And it's sort of like a wake-up call, you know what I mean? But it's hopefully a wake-up call that you could use moving forward. And probably people could learn from you and say, wow, how are you doing it? Or how does it work? Or how do you stay on top of it? Or how do you make sure, you know what I mean? How do you actually follow through? Because it's one thing to make a checklist. It's another thing to really follow through on it. That's even more important. And so I think that's a really nice thing that you're doing. Okay, the last part of the survey had to do with having fun, enjoying, obviously a lot of the things that we normally do, whether it's restaurants, travel, activities, many of them are either only mildly accessible or, a little bit accessible. And so again, you have to try to think about, okay, what do I care about? What do I value? And how can I be creative in this situation? Because no matter how much we may want international travel, like I love travel personally, but international travel is currently not available. So, okay, maybe I might read more books during this time about international travel to sort of prepare mentally for the time where that may be more of an option. But it's a question of how can I start with, okay, what do I enjoy? What do I like? What's not available to me? But, it's kind of like checking in and saying, okay, I find that I'm not doing a lot of fun activities because what I would normally do is not accessible. Okay, that makes sense. And that probably means that for the time being, I have to try to make little adjustments and sort of try new ways of enjoying my life, because one, the old way is not coming back for the time being. Two, I don't want to be stuck feeling miserable. And three, I may find that there are other options that I have never explored before that could be useful. And again, I want to partner with other people and say, hey, okay, if you usually work out and now the gyms, well, I guess the gyms are sort of semi-open right now, but if the gyms are closed, what is it that you do? Can I get together a group of my friends and kind of do a workout class together? It could be outside, or it could be, I guess, just keeping a distance from each other. The goal is to try to not be sort of so bogged down with what wasn't working, but more try out something, try to think creatively about how you could still accommodate the situation. But the most important thing has to start with what's missing in my life, what do I want out of this moment, and how can I begin to design sort of an outcome that would be better, a day routine or a weekly routine that works better for me. So those are the core ideas here that I think really matter. And again, you want to think about self-care as not a behavior, not a, okay, I did my self-care thing today, but more like a part of a design for your life. How can I create a life where I feel more rewarded, or I feel more gratified about the work that I'm doing, or I have more time with my family? It's not a one-day kind of achievement. It's more like a process. Like Janan mentioned me being in the field for almost 15 years now. There's a lot that a person, certain things only can be accomplished over dedication and learning over time that you really can't do on one day. That doesn't mean they're not possible or not worth pursuing. They do matter and they can have a good outcome, but you have to try to think incrementally. How can I begin to take steps together? So Janan, I want to I'm sticking to our kind of time routine. So I'm, to our plan. So I think we could start to move towards the Q&A section with the other panelists, right?
Sure. Well, we can leave your slide for now. Oh, it's me that's uploading. Oh, is that better? Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna turn it over to Kajan and Svedwa. Kajan is our current president of WIN, and just a wonderful person. And Svedwa Fawaz is our board member, vice president of Emerge, and also our past president of Emerge. She's nonstop going. So they'll help to do the Q&A. So everybody feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box. And then also our wonderful panelists too.
Thank you, Janan. At this moment, we do not have any questions, but participants, please feel free to send in your questions.
While we're waiting for our participants to type questions, I think I have a question, Dr. Babushkin. I have a hard time with this. Is this an interim stage or is this a permanent stage? We hear that this is interim. So we are trying to come up with different things, but somehow I feel like I'm still in denial. Every time I go out, grocery stores and stuff, I have this, I don't know, mask, muzzle, whatever you want to call it. It feels like different. It feels weird, So, I mean, how do we get past that stage?
I think you're right in the sense that it is different and it is weird. I don't think there's any denying that. But I think in my view, every kind of moment of your life, so to speak, it requires some kind of assessment. It's like when you wake up in the morning and you think, okay, what's the weather like? I want to dress appropriately for whether it's cold, hot, snowy. You know what I mean? You sort of you adjust to the situation. And hopefully that adjustment, we have the seasons are somewhat predictable. So you can kind of plan for, right now it's getting cold outside, it's sort of early, but you can kind of, know what's coming. I would try to treat this corona situation as like a sort of a weather system that's currently here. It's not going away, but as soon as it changes, you're going to be able to adjust and change back. In other words, wearing a mask or kind of tolerating the circumstances now, it is annoying. I don't think anybody really enjoys it. But you do it as a way to, if you go to the North Pole, you're not going to say, oh, it's cold, but I refuse to wear a jacket because, I don't like the cold. Well, if you're in the North Pole, you're going to be wearing warm clothes. Right now, because the virus is here and it's not going away, at least for the moment, I would try to treat it as I'm not doing this because I love it or because, this is what I was hoping for. I'm doing it because this is the most realistic adjustment I can make. I'm putting on the mask as like a part of my outfit to deal with the external circumstances. But I know that when the weather changes, I'm going to adjust again and say, okay, well, now that the virus has passed, I'm going to kind of change back and do the things that I was normally doing. You know what I mean? So it is a weird situation, but if you think about your life, I'm sure you've had to make many adjustments along the way. Like, okay, I changed jobs, or I changed roles, or, you know, I'm a parent, or now I got to adapt to, you know, there's a leak in the roof. We always, as people, have to adapt to the situation as an organism to try to kind of function at our best. This is like one of those things. It's like saying, okay, I have to try to make the best adaptation I can for my own benefit while the weather is bad outside, so to speak. You know what I mean? Now, I don't know if that metaphor sort of makes sense to you, but it's like saying, yeah, okay, I don't like it and I don't really enjoy it, but I'm doing it because I think it's the best way to take care of myself and my family. And I'm going to continue to adapt my behavior, so to speak, as the situation changes. So you can think about wearing the mask as kind of like a strength. You're saying like, well, I don't like it, but because I'm good at taking care of myself, I'm going to wear it because I'm good at taking care of my health. Not because I like the mask, but because I like doing right by me. And so I'm going to do this thing that is going to take care of me. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like it's maybe not a pleasant thing, but you're literally you're doing it because you're a thoughtful person who wants to take good care of yourself.
Right. You shifting how you think about it.
Yes, exactly. Just like you would in any other, you know, I mean, in any situation, when you're a kind of an adult who's mindful of her life, you're going to say, okay, what situation am I in? What's working? What isn't? And what kind of shift could I make? And let me check in. Is that working better for me? Okay, yes. I'm going to stay on this track until I have to make another adjustment. You know what I mean? So it's an adjustment, but I think you have the skill set to be able to do it and do it effectively.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions from the group?
Oh, Kajan.
I got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Next question, Dr. Babushkin, is will you share your slides with the participants to have this information as a guide?
Of course, yeah. And Janelle, I know you have, Janelle has a copy of my presentation, so I can send it again, but I know she has one.
Yes.
And trying to think about these, you know, these words that I put here on the slide, I think of them, these are sort of like words that work for me. I like the word start. I just think it's a nice kind of, starting I think is important. Affordable losses, I mean, you could call that anything. You can call it small attempts or, you know, a little trial and error. You know, these are just words that I prefer because they kind of come from like words I use every day. But it's the ideas that matter. And if a different word works for you, you know, replace it. Use the information in a way that applies to you and that modify it as you need, but just try to keep some of the core ideas in mind. Check in with yourself, see what's working, what isn't, start to make changes and adjustments, being flexible. You know what I mean? Like the ideas I think matter and anybody can apply them, but the way you do it and the words you use, you should use the words that make the most sense too, because you're going to remember them better and they'll be easier for you to implement.
So the next question comes from Robin Dunlop. I work multiple jobs. I was working from home prior to COVID. Now that school has started remotely, I am watching my special needs daughter sort of picking up my bad habits of working both day and at night. We're all guilty of doing that, actually. Great questions.
Well, I think part of the question here is, are you working multiple jobs because you need to in order to make enough money to support yourself? Because you describe it as a bad habit, but is it a bad habit in the sense that you're being realistic and you're doing what you need to do for your family and for yourself? If the answer is yes, then I would try to talk to your daughter and say, hey, I noticed that you're kind of following my footsteps and sort of working day and night. But what I want to explain to you is I'm doing this to try to put food on the table. I'm not doing this because it's maybe the easiest or it's the most manageable, and it may actually make it hard for me to spend time with you, which I really want to do. But I'm doing it because right now I'm in a situation where working multiple jobs is kind of the best way I've found to take care of our family and be there, you know, kind of support both of us. And so I would try to talk to your daughter and say that I wouldn't call it it's only a bad habit if one, it's not working for you and it's not having the desired effects. If you're doing it because that's your way of managing your finances, I'm not sure it's a bad habit. Now, I know that probably is stressful and a lot to manage and kind of a lot to keep track of. So I'm sure it's not easy to do, but I don't think on its face it's a bad thing. And I would try to talk to your daughter and say, you know, one thing that you want to keep in mind is for your own future, maybe try to learn from what I'm doing and try to start on a career path where maybe you don't have to work multiple jobs. You know what I mean? Like, I don't mean working multiple jobs has to be a bad thing, but it's probably harder to manage in some way. So your daughter can really learn from you, and she can learn from your approach and say, you know, mom is doing, or dad, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I know the gender, is doing the most that they can to really take care of our family. And they're kind of being smart actually about, hey, this job isn't paying me enough, so I need to kind of be flexible and do a lot of different stuff and use different skills. But one of the things that the parent is probably communicating is to say, you want to try to learn from my example, sort of be smart and say, you know, try to set up a situation for your own future where you don't have to maybe juggle so many things, and you could have, let's say, one, you know, main job that you do. So I don't think it has to be a bad habit. Or a bad thing. It depends on what it does for you and how you communicate that to your daughter. So I hope that answers, I hope I understood the question correctly.
Okay, next question is, in taking care of ourselves, how do we start building a new normal? Example, when you see people in other countries wearing masks as if there was nothing on their face.
Oh, like they're so used to wearing the mask.
I believe so.
Well, I think first of all, what's a new normal? A new normal is something that feels that you're used to, that you kind of do as a routine, and that kind of becomes a part of your life. I'm not sure. I mean, I was in Japan last year for a trip, and a lot of people in Japan wear masks kind of as a regular thing. I don't know if that's going to become how that's going to change in our country, you know, in terms of moving forward after this pandemic. But I think it really depends on what you mean. If the new normal means how can I remember to wear a mask every day, even though it's like I'm not used to it. Okay, you want to try to think of what's a good reminder for you to take care of your health, because wearing a mask, again, in my view, is a way to protect your health. It's not I guess it could be a fashion statement or a political statement, but at baseline, it's a way to say, my health matters, and I want to be there for myself and for my family and for my loved ones. So I'm going to wear a mask as an extra layer of protection. So to make that normal, I think the question is, how can I try to keep my own needs and my own health in mind? How can I wake up every day and say, hey, my health matters, staying healthy matters to me, and therefore I'm going to do X, Y, Z steps to do it. And that could apply to anything. It could apply to wearing a mask. It could apply to exercise. It could apply to nutrition. It's a question of how can I align my values with my behavior? I think a lot of things that are kind of self-care related, they're hard initially because not everybody grows up, let's say, eating healthy food or whatever. Because everybody grows up in a different environment. And the definition of healthy food often changes over the years, you know, with science and cultural changes and stuff like that. So how do you make it normal? I think to me, one way to make it normal is to try to remember your values. What do I most care about? I care about being healthy. I care about living a long life. I care about having a healthy body so I can function. I care about having good relationships, right? If I can remember what my values are and what my kind of goals for myself are, my behavior should be driven by that. And so I think the way that things become normal is if you can identify your values and try to sort of live those values, the behavior will flow from that. The more I can think that, hey, my health matters, wearing a mask to me is sort of second nature because I'm saying, hey, okay, my health matters, and right now wearing a mask is important, right? And so I don't know if, at least that's my way of thinking about it. I hope that if that answers your question, great. If it doesn't, please ask the question again. But I think to make it a normal, the best way to make it normal is to try to align it with who you are and what kind of life you want to live and what ultimately matters to you. If your priorities are take care of myself, live a long life, be there for my family, your behaviors, if you remember those values and try to remind yourself of them, your behavior should naturally flow from that because you're going to then be more likely to do these things to take good care of yourself, at least in my experience.
Great. Thank you. So, there's echo. I don't know. So the next question comes from Diana Smith. In an effort to create habits around what you've presented, the 4 steps and how they relate to the survey, and in learning how to be introspective, is there any reading you would suggest that is approachable and a good way to share this information with others?
Very good question. I'll have to think about it, because I'm sure the answer is yes. I can't say I can think of an easy book reference off the top of my head right now, but I will think about it, because ultimately it's kind of like, how do these principles apply to you? But okay, let me give it some thought, and I can follow up with a group about that.
Okay, the next question is, how do you handle an employer that is actually not flexible and not willing to make adjustments for employees with children at home?
Well, again, I would try to have a conversation with the employer and say, I want to try to understand your position. You know, are you not being flexible because it's not possible? In other words, a lot of times I think what can be most successful is to turn something that's a frustration or a difficulty into a conversation. That doesn't mean you and the employer are going to agree, or they're going to see your point of view. Hopefully they're at least open to having the conversation. But what I would do is I would approach them and say, you know, I know this is like a difficult time for employers and employees, and I know our current policy is XYZ. Can I at least try to understand where you're coming from and why the policy is the way it is? Because then maybe it will help me to sort of live within those rules. Because if you can understand where the employer is coming from and what their rationale is, you might be able to work with that. They might say, well, we can't have flexibility because we need people here on every shift, and, you know, we can't have flexible time because, you know, our work is, that's how it is. Okay, if I can understand that, then I might be able to say, okay, well, is there a way I could still live within those rules that still works for me? In other words, you want to try to do a good assessment of the situation and think about, what are my options? If the employer is not being flexible, what can I do for me? Or could I collaborate with my colleagues to kind of come up with some kind of creative solution? It's best, of course, if both people, if the employer and the employee can be flexible, but it's not always the case. Some jobs may, you know, like some of the jobs that require a person to be there in person and can't be done from home, for example. Okay, there's not a way to do surgery by computer, at least as of right now, in the current day and age of technology. So, but that doesn't mean that there aren't workarounds that could be possible, either through conversations with the employer or colleagues or other people in the industry. So I would try to say, let me have a conversation with the employer about, to at least understand their position and what are the limitations. What framework are they working in? Let me try to understand their mindset and how they've structured the situation. That will give me more ideas about what's doable and what's not doable. It may not be that there's endless flexibility, but at least I'll know the rationale and the framework that I'm in, and I could use that to then try to problem solve my next step. So, okay, sometimes limitations are hard to deal with, but they can, at least when you know the limits, you could then creatively work around them.
Okay, so our next question comes, I think I'm saying the name, Elizabeth Kaplicki. I hope I'm saying the name right. It's, how can we reduce this overwhelming feeling of always being on alert?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's a good question because I think there's a lot of uncertainty. I think that, you know, this sort of situation is moving and is changing. And I think it's trying to assess the risk in any given situation, because you want to try to think about, am I on alert because in general I'm kind of anxious about things and I'm sort of extra worried, or, which is one possibility, am I on alert because there are actual dangers? You know, everything in life is kind of like, everything we do has some degree of risk, high risk, low risk, medium risk. And so you want to try to think about, okay, if I'm on alert all the time, is that because I'm always, you know, if I'm in let's say I'm working in a hospital ward with patients who have confirmed COVID-19 symptoms, and I'm there every day, and I'm short on protective equipment, and there's not a lot of people rotating in the job. There's poor air circulation, and I have to work 24-hour shifts, and I have elderly parents that live with me, and they're very high risk. You know, I'm trying to think of like worst case scenario, so to speak. okay, if I'm in that situation, I'm on high alert because the environment calls for me to be on high alert. My being on high alert is, quote, appropriate to that situation. I should be on high alert because that's very high risk and I need to be extra mindful and kind of try to work around that problem. If I'm on high alert because I don't know how this virus is transmitted, so to speak, and I'm worried about walking around in the park, personally, I think according to my knowledge base, if you're outside and keeping your distance from people, you're more or less safe. Not safe as in 100% safe because there's no such thing, but it's much less risk. So you want to try to do a check-in about what's the reason that I'm on alert? Am I on alert because things scare me, or because I don't know how to keep myself safe, or because I'm in a more dangerous situation, or because I'm afraid of infecting others? You know what I mean? The more you can understand about why and when you're in these alert states, the more you can actually adjust it. Because if you're walking across the train tracks and there's a train coming at you and you're on high alert, that's a great time to be on high alert because the train is coming, you want to get out of the way. But if you're sitting around, in your backyard and you're by yourself and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get this virus right now, more likely it has to do with some kind of anxiousness that you feel that may not be tied to the literal danger, but some kind of other danger that you're feeling within yourself. And you want to try to think about, well, what is that danger that I'm afraid of? What is that thing? And can I get some help figuring that out? Whether it's from a friend, it could be from a therapist, but the goal is to try to do that kind of good assessment about when and why and what can I do about it.
Okay, last question. I feel like the pandemic has made me a bit selfish because I have to keep up with the self-care to keep from having a panic attack. What can I do to not feel like I'm being selfish by taking so much time for myself?
Well, first of all, I think selfishness has a bad name in our culture. There are times where it's very good to be selfish. You know what I mean? It's just like that sort of often used example. If you're on the airplane and the masks come down, you want to put on your own mask, right? I mean, I don't know if any of us, fortunately, hopefully have never been in those situations really, but the idea is it's a good time to be selfish because if you're not in a good state, you can't help somebody else. But if you feel like you're spending a lot of time taking care of yourself, I would try to think, okay, first of all, I'm doing it for a good reason because maybe I need to take good care of myself. And secondly, there are many ways to be thoughtful about people that, again, you can be flexible about. You could send them a message and say, hey, I haven't been that available lately. But partially that's because I'm really kind of isolating right now because I think that's my way of staying safe. I mean, and I'm sorry, and I'd love to be in touch with you, and maybe we could, FaceTime or something. But I'm hoping I'm going to see you more after the pandemic is over. But I would try to do more communication. If you're normally helping or around other people more and you're doing it less, I would try to talk to them and let them know and have conversations with them and say, hey, I'm thinking a lot about, I'm trying to do a lot to take care of myself. But part of that is because I want to be around for the long term so that when the pandemic has died down, we can spend time together. You know what I mean? Often when we're doing selfish things, some of them are, quote, truly selfish. Some of them have other people in mind. You know what I mean? If I'm working hard at my job to earn more money, that may be partially because I'm trying to improve my quality of life, but it's also likely that I may be able to have more time for my family or contribute more to charity. You know what I mean? There are often selfishness, I think, is kind of, unfortunately, there's different kinds of selfishness. And some types of selfishness are actually a way of being thoughtful that include, I'm sure if you're keeping your distance from people, you're also considering their needs. So I would try to think about sort of what's my definition of what's selfish, and is it all negative selfishness? If your selfishness means I never think of others, I cough on everybody I see, I drive through red lights because I don't care about it. Okay, that would be a reckless kind of self. I'm sure you don't mean that, but try to think about what's the type of selfishness that I'm engaging in? Is it helping me? And if I find it affects other people, can I talk to them and sort of just give them an understanding of where I'm coming from and help to reassure them that I still think about them. I'm just not available during this particular time because I really need to take good care of them.
Very good. That's all our questions for tonight.
All right. 10 for 10.
That was awesome. Time for, wait, what did you say?
I mean, we took care of all the questions. So.
Oh, okay. Well, there was one comment that was made by Madreen. I hope I'm saying the name right. And Madrine was really upset about how people don't wear masks and just like walk around or don't wear them correctly. It's
It can be
really
very frustrating. I think there's a lot of, it's a tough situation because sometimes these people are not really approachable. But you're right. I think, unfortunately, in some of these moments, the best you could do is just to try to take care of yourself and either get yourself out of that situation or, don't be close to them. I think it's a really tough place because people treat this issue as sort of like optional, or, it's like, oh, every perspective somehow is equally valid. Like if I think wearing a mask is stupid, then it is. Personally, scientifically, I can't imagine that's true, but okay. I mean, sometimes we have to deal with individual differences and have to say, okay, if you're not going to wear a mask, so to speak, I'm not going to be around you. And if it's somebody who's in your life or a family member or a friend, I would say to them, look, I care about you and you're important to me. I know we disagree, but if you're going to do that, unfortunately, I just won't be around you. And it's nothing personal, but I have to do that for myself and for my family. But it is hard. It's frustrating.
I know. I wish we had more time. I feel like we could entertain more questions. And Dr. Babushkin, thank you so much